Let me show you a timeline. From here to here is probably 20 years. We know from autopsy studies and surgery during Vietnam War and even the Korean War that those teen and early 20-year-old soldiers had evidence in their arteries already. The channels were open, but this disease had already started. Here's another 10 to 15 years of progress. This is about a 2 to 4 minute process from plaque rupture to clot filling the channel to I'm having a heart attack, I'm having a stroke, something awful is happening.
Before you move off of that, I wanted to talk about Tim Russert's pathology report. Is now a good time to do that?
Please, that's perfect.
So we've covered the Tim Russert story many, many times. He was a world-renowned great journalist. And what he would do, he was well known putting public figures on the channel and saying, you know, this is what you said 3 years ago. Now you're doing something very different. So a lot of people really loved that. And I was not a news hound, so I didn't watch it. But here's one of the problems. He started having some challenges. His waistline started expanding above 36. He was having some cough, it sounded like. There were some blood pressure issues. He went to see his doctor. His doctor did really good standard of care. He said, hey, doc, why don't we do a stress test? He did a stress test. He passed it with flying colors. A few weeks later, he was recording part of his show at the studio. He said hello to one of the producers that came in and keeled over and died. So he had just passed a stress test. So if you go back and you look at these segments in David's image here, he was at that one, the third from the end, where he had stuff brewing in there. He had all that witch's brew that David's been describing, those immune cells. Again, he loved to eat. He was out, had a lot of business meetings with a lot of luminaries, and he admitted, and his doctor admitted the day after this happened, he kept saying, next week I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to start later losing weight. That was his big issue, as it is for a lot of us. Now I'm going into some detail on this because, again, it's a wanting to help people begin to understand the images here. So he had his heart attack. He died within a very short time period, day or two. They were able to get an autopsy, which meant they cut through his vessels in his heart just like this. And to David's point, the quote that came back from the pathologist was, the inside of Tim Russert's arteries in his heart looked like the face of a teenager with a bad case of acne. So he had these pimples all over. And again, the stress test didn't find it. And again, that's what killed him. So thank you for the digression.
Absolutely. That exact process that happened to Tim Russert in Shelby County, where I live in southwestern Tennessee, 3 people every day of the week die suddenly the same way Tim Russert did. We've got about 1 million population here. Of all the adults in America, you can do the math, and roughly 600 folks a day are dying from that around the country. Doesn't hit the news headlines unless it's a celebrity, but it is absolutely the tip of the spear on this pandemic. The other thing that I want to point out on this slide, and that this has only been understood more recently, how does this apply to the small blood vessels that I was talking about, the tiny ones in the brain and the kidney and the heart and everywhere? Well, think about the last time you had a scab on your knee or your wrist or your fingertip or whatever. And when that clot is new, it doesn't stay on very well, does it? It's what we call friable. It means it's fragile. It can break apart. It can let loose. And when that happens, and this happens recurrently after people have had plaque rupture, those little tiny pieces of clot go downstream and plug off those small blood vessels. So think about this. What if I had plaque rupture at this point? The clot doesn't grow big enough to fill the channel, and yet it's a clot. It's a scab on the surface of that plaque. Well, those little tiny pieces of clot are going to go downstream and plug multiple tributaries. And this is actually what happens day in and day out to people with arterial disease, with arterial plaque. And it's silent, totally silent until it's not. Until your doctor says you have chronic kidney disease or dementia or any of those small vessel diseases. So the same process that damages the big vessels and gets everybody's attention immediately is also responsible for the small vessel damage. And that's why most cases of dementia can also be prevented. Not every case of dementia, but most cases, because if we keep the larger arteries healthy, we keep the smaller arteries healthy.